running start. So big shout out to God for that too. Thank you for sharing that. All right, we have our last speaker. I have the pleasure of introducing Kara Burns. She's in her 4th year as an ambassador from Denver, Colorado, and her speech is Getting Up After You Fall.
As I'm ending the retreat, I just really want to say how grateful and honored I am to be kind of the end bookend with such amazing speakers. And the truth is, you can't tell the difference between the test talkers and the other speakers today, because everybody's been just so amazing. I'm honored, right? Amazing ass speakers today. I went through this whole talk that I had prepared on luck. I had prayed to God. I was like, God, what should I be talking about? And I had gotten this message over and over again that I should be talking about luck. So I prepared this whole talk on luck. Was through it and was practicing it. And I realized that it wasn't my talk. That is not what I was supposed to talk on today. So I tell you that partly so that you can give me a little bit of grace if I'm stumbling. And if you're like, oh, well, you know, this girl's just barely prepared. Yeah, I wrote this shit yesterday, so. Instead, what I'm going to talk to you about today is getting up after you fall. Getting back up again after things fall apart. That's a universal truth, right? We all have stuff like that. If Betsy was here, she would tell you that during interactive events, I hid behind her last night. When there was an interactive event that happened, it's not my jam, except for when Emily says, hey, you want to come up here and hula hoop? And I'm like, yes! And I ran all the way from the back to the front, and then I realized I wasn't going to get a hula hoop, and I'm like, I'm out. So I'm not going to ask you to do anything interactive, because again, that's not my jam. But what I am going to ask you to do is in your head, I'm going to ask you some questions, and if something resonates with you, I'd like for you to imagine your hand going up in the air, okay? Again, you don't have to do anything. I'm not going to ask you to like rub each other's backs. It's so obnoxious when people turn around and rub your partner's back. Don't touch me. Back to my questions. I get off track a little bit. That's what happens when I write shit yesterday. Who here overeats when they're stressed out? Oh, you guys, I said you don't have to put your hands because we're fixing to get a whole heck of a lot more vulnerable. Don't put your hands in the air. I mean, I dig it, but who yells at their kids when they're stressed out? Who drives when they shouldn't, when they've drank too much? Who struggles with alcoholism or addiction? Who's struggling in their divorce or has been cheated on or cheated on someone? Who's changed jobs or lost their job in the last few years? Who pees the bed when they're nervous? I'm the only one? That's fine. It's cool. Who here has been released from federal prison? So many of you know my story, but for those of you who don't, I'm a felon/drug addict who was released from federal prison a little over 5 years ago after struggling with addiction and alcoholism for 18 years. And I literally share my story with anyone who will listen, my story of hope and my story of transformation. But if I'm being honest with you or frank with you, prison was the least of the places that my addiction took me. I was 22 years old the first time that I was arrested, and I got out and I was high on meth the same day. I didn't have the ability, no matter what my resolve was, to stay clean. And I had resolve, Nobody wants to grow up to be a drug addict or a junkie. I had resolve, but it's like no matter what I did, I would always relapse over and over and over again. One of the lowest parts of my addiction was about a month before I was indicted by the feds. And I was in this fancy loft downtown, laying on carpet in my living room, and I was just curled up in a ball crying because my life was a total crap hole. I lost everything. I lost my career. I lost my kid. I was strung out on drugs. The dude that I lived with hadn't been home in God knows how long. And I just remember wailing and crying and screaming. It was concrete walls, thank goodness, because I was pretty loud. But I was just crying out. I was crying out, and I have never in my life wanted to be dead more in that moment than in my whole entire life, then or before or after. Thank God all of the guns were in my apartment were hidden, because if they wouldn't have been, I don't know that I would be standing here in front of you today. Meth it had ravaged my body. I was 30 pounds less than I am now. My teeth were all jacked up. So when I tell you that federal prison saved my life, I mean it. I mean it. It was such an amazing opportunity for me to change my life. And I think part of me knew it. I think part of me knew it. I went through a really, really, really rad 9-month-long drug rehab program while I was locked up. So out here, that would be something like, $30,000 program. It was a really, really, really good program. And I got the skills that I needed to make better choices and to learn how to cope, because that was my big thing. I didn't know how to cope. Stay clean, and then something would happen, and then I would relapse again, right? So those skills were just like a huge game changer for me. And in fact, there's only a handful of times over the last 8 years that I've been clean and sober that I can tell you that I've wanted to use. A handful of times. And it's always in a moment of trauma. So anything that involves my daughter, I struggle with that. When I lost my dad, or breakups in relationships, those things are usually when I want to use. Now I know that my story is fixing to get a little bit more relatable for some of you in the room, because you might not have been strung out on meth or been released from federal prison, but I know that you've fallen. I know that things have fallen apart for you. And I have fallen recently. I had some drinks a few weeks ago in a bar. And the interesting thing about that is, I wasn't in a moment of crisis. I wasn't struggling trying to cope. I was just in the wrong place with someone who didn't understand my addiction, and my guard was down. Let me back up, this is important. Since my release from prison, when I go out to places, I smell people's drinks because they're disgusting and they smell gross. And it reminds me of why I don't drink. So I'm like, and I'll smell it. I'm like, ugh, gross. Why do you drink? It's so gross. So I've been doing that for 8 years now. 5 years, excuse me. So I smelled her drink. And she goes, you can just have a sip. I'm like, So there's 2 people that live inside of me. There's this girl on this side who's the old Kara, and she's a partier, and she takes chances, and she doesn't necessarily do things that are rational. She usually wants to be the center of attention. You guys, some of that might not have gone away. And then there's the other party Kara on this side, who I have been developing for the last 8 years. And she's real smart. And she makes really good choices. And she's pretty rational most of the time, but she's still really funny. But it's kind of responsible Kara, right? So it's this juxtaposition of, this girl and this girl. And that girl won out in that moment because she goes, oh, I can't just have a drink. So I take a sip of the beer. That's all it took. That's all it took, was for my guard to be down. I take a sip of the beer, and guess what? I drank her whole beer. She realized then that I don't drink like other people. She told me later on that she goes, I'm the kind of drinker, Karen, that's like, oh, let's stop off on the side of the road and make sure we're doing okay. And you're the kind of drinker that's like, and she's right. I was gone. I had 3 beers, which was a lot for me. And it wasn't until the next morning when I woke up, it still hadn't hit me yet. But guess what? I immediately went to a place of shame. Instantly. I was like, oh my God, nobody can ever know about this. She's the only person that knows, and nobody can know about this. Ever. I'm gonna hide it. No one can know. Somehow, my thoughts and thinking had gone to a place of, you're worthless, you've lost your 8 years, you're a fake, you're a phony. People aren't going to want to believe in you or what you talk about or what you say anymore, because look what you did. So let's drill down on that for a second. And this kind of goes back to everything that everybody's talked about today, because we've all touched on it in one way or another. It's our thoughts and where they take us. And my thoughts had run away. And those thoughts are lies. They're lies. It's not truth. It has nothing to do with who I am today. So that's something that I probably will always work on, because it's that, it's that fight. But it's definitely something that I'm learning to identify quicker, where I'm like, oh, nope, what's that about? And try not to engage it. So back to my story, it wasn't until I was working out that next Monday at the gym, and I got my heart rate up into the red, and all the emotion came flooding over me, and I had a panic attack at the gym, which I'm glad that I had it there, because those people know me and they love me, and they were, there to comfort me and let me know that everything was going to be okay. But I had to radically understand what I had done. Now with my mind racing, I had to figure out, was this a slip, or is this a relapse? And I did what every smart woman in this room does when we have a question. I Googled that shit. and I realized that a slip is something that happens one time, and a relapse is something that's happened over and over and over again. Well, I've relapsed my whole life. My whole life, I've always slid back. I don't really know anything different than that. The next step is I had to let go of what everyone was going to think of me. Thinking about some of that, I have realized that what I think about, what others think about me, is the antithesis of authenticity. I start to lose some of myself in that, kind of like running in the winter months, which I can't stand. I didn't lose my credibility. I didn't lose my 8 years. I am amazing. I am a rock star. I did slip, but I had to kind of rationally challenge all of those thinking, those thoughts. Once I let go of that fake facade of what everyone was thinking about me, somehow I had to forgive myself. So that one's really hard, because I made some key mistakes that I know better than to make. Like, I run a really clean program. I don't do stupid things when I'm in crisis. I'm really careful who I hang out with. Like, I've run a really clean program, but I slipped. And I just had to say, okay, I forgive myself, and I've forgotten one key thing. I've forgotten one key thing in the last 5 years since my release from prison. I'm a miracle. I am a a miracle. I have made it all of this time. Most people like me, addicts who come out of prison, half of us, go back within the first year. Half of us, and up to 70% within 5 years. Those aren't good odds. So by that standard, I'm literally killing it. And that was a big part of me that washed over me, that was like, okay, I can forgive myself. Look at all of these great things. And I'm going to progress. I'm going to make it. So if you could ask me a question right now, what I'm hoping that you would ask me is, what makes this time different than the other times? And there's this gentleman, his name is Johann Hari, and he based a TED Talk off of this research. And the research says this, that when your life's in the crapper, and when things aren't going well, and when you've lost basically everything, there's nothing left to do but get high and drink. And that was my situation. I've lost everything. And I wanted to die. It was a shithole, and I was like, it doesn't even matter. We're just gonna wake up and get messed up anyway, because it just doesn't matter anymore. But in May of 2019, I had created a life, like Betsy said, that couldn't even dream up, that I couldn't even imagine. It blows my mind that I was able to stay clean and sober for 8.5 years. That is something that I never would have imagined in my 20s. I went through the Running Start program in 2015. That program, and Nicole DeBoom, and everyone associated with Skirt Sports, Noel, people who have been, around forever, have influenced my life and accepted me. There's something that happens when you have that belonging, right? There's something that happens, and it was the springboard for a new life for me. Completely changed my trajectory. I ran a marathon last year, the Chicago Marathon. I'm excited that I'm running the New York City Marathon this year. And I would have yeah, girl, yeah, right? Myrna's making faces at me. We had to connect for a moment. This one's really rad. I get to create employment for people like me who are in vulnerable places in their lives for a really rad-ass fitness club out of New York. Somehow along the way I became a homeowner, and I would have never have thought that would have happened. The best thing though is that I have amazing networks of women in my life, not just like one or two, but I have networks of women who speak into my life and I speak into theirs. And again, to everyone's point today about how things change when you're with other people, it's been life-changing for me. And so in May of 2019, my life was amazing. I didn't have to feel the need to go get messed up and change things, alter my reality because my life sucks, because my life's amazing, frankly. I'm so grateful for it. So once I concluded that this was just a one-off event and, a slip and not a relapse, next to Megan's point, I had to get vulnerable and I'd ask for help. I had to get back into meetings and I had to go connect with my therapist and I had to tell the people very closest to me what had happened and let them know, hey, just in case I'm really struggling the next, little while, this is what happened and I really need you to have my back right now. And each one of those people has had my back. So unlike the me of the past, I've gotten back up again. This isn't a relapse, it's a slip. And those few beers that I had in that bar that day, they're just a tiny little blip and a part of my journey that I get to now share that normalizes slipping. It normalizes some of the struggles that people who struggle with addiction go through. I am recovery, and this is recovery. So I could have come up here today and I could have shared with you my cute little talk on luck. It wouldn't have been as good. And nobody would have known any different. But what's the point of this amazing network of women in this sisterhood if we don't take off our laundry and get a little naked in front of each other, right? I'm grateful that you give me the opportunity to do that because this was exactly what I needed to talk about today. And a winner is just someone who tried one more time. I want to say that again because that one's important. A winner is just someone who tried one more time. If you don't follow me on IG, my IG handle is never quit trying, and it's never quit trying for a reason. When we fall down and we scrape our knees, we got to jump right back up again. Here's a side note, funny story about this. I was training run for the Chicago Marathon last summer, and I fell down 3 times and skinned this knee 3 times on the same training run and popped right back up like a crazy person. And I was like, oh my God, I'm one of those crazy runners. That's when I knew. I was like, I'm a crazy person. So this is what I want for you to take with you today. When shit gets really real and you find yourself in a poop box, I want you to remember these 3 things. If you immediately go to a place of shame and you don't want anybody to know about it, that's a red flag. Something's wrong. And maybe not everybody needs to know about it, because I'm not putting this up on social media so that my boss can be like, oh man. I'm not doing that. So maybe not everybody needs to know, but maybe your people need to know. Maybe the people closest to you who can support you through it need to know. Circling back to Brene Brown, she seems to be the fluidity today because she's a badass. Don't carry shame, guys. Don't carry shame over anything, because that just keeps us in a box and excluded from one another, right? And that's all lies, and it's just not what we stand for. 2, just going back to Megan this morning, my first talker this morning, we're bookending. You gotta be vulnerable and ask for help. I used to think that this has been one of the biggest things that I struggle with since my release from prison. It's always the normal people box, and then it's the Kara people, or the felon box, or it's the drug addict box. So it's everybody, these people live in this camp, and these people live in this camp. And that's such flawed thinking. And I've learned that over the last 5 years, because the people that I think that had it all together, they're train wrecks. You scratch that surface a little bit, and they're train wrecks. They might be very good at faking it or showing you that they're faking it, or not so good, right? Not so good. But it's all super, super flawed, and I'm actually far better off than they are. So don't get caught in that trap of what other people think. And the third thing is, whatever it is, whether it happened to you, whether it's something that you didn't have control over, like a divorce or one of those things, whether it happened to you or if it's you falling, you slipping, like I did, it doesn't define you. It doesn't define you. Your kid who struggles with, drug addiction or mental health illnesses doesn't define you. Your job doesn't define you. Your relationship that's maybe not working out at the best, that doesn't define you. Eating all the cake for breakfast, that doesn't define you. How you get up after you fall is what defines you, my friends. Thank you so much.